All right, 2:05 on a Monday. Little Motown Monday for you. Coming up 2 hours from now, Craig Hoffman will perform his radio show following me, and I drew his ire. And I invited him on the show, and Mr. Hoffman is with us on the Access on the BetQL guest hotline. He's a guest on his radio station, and he's mad at me about something I don't understand. Hello, Hoffman. How are you?
I'm not mad at you, Chris. I'm just trying to make you a little smarter on some NBA stuff.
I appreciate that. You are a much bigger NBA guy than me, and granted, I have a hard enough time with the NFL salary cap, something that I think I understand a lot more than the NBA, but let's I appreciate your time, first of all. Let's circle back. So I said on Twitter, I didn't understand how everybody was blasting the Wizards for 2 years ago not trading Bradley Beal when they could have gotten a lot more. I grant you, they could have gotten a lot more 2 years ago than they got yesterday. Nobody would deny that. The question for me, what I didn't understand, and what you said you had an answer to, is why that would have made sense, because I don't know how it would have made sense considering back-to-back 30-plus point seasons, a playoff run, and the fact that they had lost in the first round of the Philadelphia 76ers, how that would have made sense and how Ted wouldn't have gotten killed for being a cheapskate. So please tell me what I'm missing.
So it can be kind of answered with the question, right? So I'll ask you the question. Did the Wizards have a way to win an NBA championship with Bradley Beal on that roster
2 years ago?
2 years ago. Did they have a path to acquire another player? Like, first of all, let's say this. Do we agree that Bradley Beal is not good enough? Well, he is an excellent player. He is not good enough to be the best player on an NBA championship team.
I would largely agree with that. Absolutely, yes.
History says you have to have a top 5 player unless you're the 2004 Detroit Pistons. That is the only exception since at least 1980. So unless you think Beal was either that good or capable of being that good, the answer would be no. He's not. So then the next question in the sequence becomes, did you have a path to acquire a player who was better than Bradley Beal, who was one of those top 5 players, in the timeline that Bradley Beal would still be in his prime? And if the answer is no, then if you're serious about winning an NBA championship, you have to maximize your assets. And that can get into, and I'm certainly more than willing to get into some of the nitty-gritty details of the NBA salary cap, but if the answer is no to that question, Bradley Beal is not good enough to be the best player on a championship team, and there is no way to acquire one with him on the roster, then you use him to acquire the assets needed to acquire one, whether that is future draft picks, other young players who you can take a flyer on in the same way that, Oklahoma City took a flyer on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and was willing to trade Paul George, etc. That is the basic answer to your question.
All right, so let me counterpunch here and say, if you're saying the only way, the logical only way that you can win an NBA championship is by having a top 5 player on the roster, then basically that would eliminate most teams in the NBA, right? And I could even make an argument that, well, like a guy like Jimmy Butler in the Miami Heat, he's not a top 5 player in the league, but
he was as close as we've gotten to an exception.
Okay.
I mean, that is what the Heat did this year. That's part of the reason why it was so remarkable. And,
right.
Not to restart our analytics kerfuffle, but like there's a reason that nobody saw them as having a chance.
Understood that they overachieved. All right, so let me ask maybe a better one. I guess you're like, all right, so a guy like Damian Lillard, who I don't know if, what would you say, top 7?
Top 10.
Okay,
sure.
Top 10. Clearly, he has not been able to elevate Portland by himself, but their problem is they haven't been able to get the surrounding pieces. So if you have a guy like Damian Lillard, right, and he's clearly better than Bradley Beal, yet they haven't traded him, and apparently he now wants to stay, like, they've been patient trying to find the right recipe. So is that not what the Wizards were trying to do? Is, okay, we can't get Brad is not top 3, top 5. He's not Giannis. He's not Nikola Jokic. He's not Luka Doncic. He's not LeBron James. But if we surround him with the right supporting cast, hell yeah, we can make a deep playoff run, and you never know how the cookie might crumble. I mean, is that not a good philosophy, or at least a solid philosophy?
And then said a bunch of other stuff that undercut it, which is Damian Lillard is better than Bradley Beal.
Yes.
And the problem is Damian Lillard is better than Bradley Beal by a lot, by the kind of margins we're talking about here.
Right.
I'm on his basketball reference page, so excuse me for counting on the radio. But Lillard has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 All NBA appearances in his career. Beal has, I believe, 1.
Yeah.
He might have 0. He's a 3-time All-Star, is Beal. Lillard is a, let's see, scrolling up. He is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-time All-Star. Lillard has gotten legitimate MVP consideration in the past. Like, Dame's career compared to Brad's is a very, very different story. And so,
agreed.
Philosophically, sure, what you said is true, but that implies that, like, Beal is at a level that Lillard is, and he's not.
So what you're saying is the Wizards erred in not necessarily building a good roster around Bradley Beal. It was erring in evaluating Bradley Beal as a guy that you could build a really good roster around.
Correct.
Is that kind of fair? Okay.
And like he could be the second option potentially, especially at his peak around the right guy.
Right.
And he's a really valuable player. Like, I mean, Philly, like we know he's going to Phoenix now, but like, could Philly have had Brad be the second option and be a better basketball team that's contending for a title next year? Absolutely. That to me is like the right kind of fit, him with Joel Embiid, which is, by the way, why I think this is super interesting for Phoenix, because they got a bunch of perimeter dudes who all kind of do the same stuff.
Yeah.
They're all really, really good at it. But from a fit standpoint, I really don't know what Phoenix is doing. But that's besides the point. Like Brad is the centerpiece of a roster is just not going to be good enough to win a championship. And then the question you have to be able to ask is, especially once they moved on from John, who they thought could be that top 5 type of player if healthy and doing all his John Wall stuff, that's why you draft him 1 overall, was there a way to bring in that guy? If you know Brad is not that, if he is a 2 or a 3, is there a path to acquiring that? And that's where the Wizards also erred, is even if they had the recognition that Beal is not even Damian Lillard, nevertheless Giannis or Jokic or LeBron in his prime or Steph Curry on down the list, even someone like Ja Morant, who I realize now with all the stuff around him, this is a bit of a different conversation. Ja, Zion, these types of younger players who you think could ascend to that level with more maturity on or off the court, given who we're talking about and what we're talking about. There was no path to get there. There was no move to be made outside of getting extremely lucky in the NBA draft of acquiring that caliber player. And that's why not trading him when he had that maximum value. It's exactly the reasons you don't want to trade him, or you're suggesting that they would have been nuts to trade him, is why you trade him. You want to, it's a markets thing. You trade when the value is high. You sell high, you buy low. And instead, they are selling at the absolute lowest, and thus they are buying nothing in return.
But, okay, and I understand that. But if they would have traded him 2 years ago, what do you think the reaction, from Wizards fans and
Joy.
From really?
Yeah. I mean, there would have been some people that are upset. I mean, I've certainly seen the wide swath of reaction on, for instance, my Twitter timeline today. There are fans that are legitimately sad that he's gone, even if they understand why. They're like, man, I really like that guy. He seemed like a good dude. He played hard. I saw one fan who's like, that's the only Wizards jersey I've ever had. Like, it's sad, but at the end of the day, like if you really understand the league and understand that you need to relentlessly pursue that top 5 player or the chance to acquire said top 5 player, then you just go, this is part of doing business. The Wall Beal era, thanks for the memories, but we got to do this. And I think NBA fans mostly know that. So certainly, I mean, maybe I live in a more NBA media bubble space than I do NBA fan space, but I think people would have been like, thank God this team finally did something different. They finally understood that you can't just keep going back to the same well and being happy with second round playoff appearances. Because that's the other thing, Chris, is like, it's not like this team ever really got anywhere. The best run that they had, Wall and Beal together, is they lose in the second round in a
2017
heartbreaking series
18,
to the Celtics that they should have won.
Right.
Like, they're classic underachievers in that way. Right. Or that was their ceiling and they achieved all they could. Those are the only two options. So, yeah, I genuinely think that Wizards fans would have been pretty psyched to see a Paul George-esque return or a Rudy Gobert-esque return a couple of years ago and not sign Brad to a supermax 35%, $250 million contract.
I just wonder how they would have processed if they didn't get another, I guess, superstar in return, how they would have processed giving up at that point on trying to be, like, to me, Bob Kraft said it the other day, different sport. My goal is to make the playoffs everywhere and every year. And then you take your chances, right? And I think that's how most owners operate, as opposed to this space that I think you're getting at, and I think the Danny Rouilles of the world are getting at, which is it only matters if you win a championship, and that's the only thing you should be shooting for. And I guess I wonder, is that just a different philosophy, or
it's the different sport, right? It's like if you get in the NFL playoffs, it's 3 single games, or 4 single games, depending on if you have a bye, and anything can happen. It's single elimination. It's chaos.
Sure.
It's
so it's a little easier to do it in that space as opposed to the NBA space.
Absolutely. NBA history tells you if you are not, certain boxes checked, top 5 player, top 10 offense, top 10 defense, point differential during the regular season of about 10 points, like plus 10, you're not winning the championship. And Denver ticked all those boxes this year. The closest one they didn't come to ticking was defensively. But from December, it was December 21st or something on, they were a top 10 defense in the league. So most of the season, they had found that level and maintained it throughout the playoffs. And we see some really good defensive performances from them in the NBA Finals, holding Miami under 100 a ton. And so that if you're not trying for a championship, what's the point? And in the NFL, trying for a championship means getting in the playoffs and giving yourself a chance. In the NBA, building what Winger called in that introductory press conference a generational contender means having one of these top flight players, the Steph Currys, the LeBrons, the Jokic's, etc. And the Wizards have quite literally never had one of those guys. And they've never put forth the effort in acquiring one outside of trading Arenas and company for what ultimately turned out to be tanking into the number 1 pick. And then, unfortunately for them, quote unquote, it's John Wall that particular year. And John falls just shy of that and then has injuries really derail his career in terms of the level. They put themselves in a position, but they didn't pursue it with the relentlessness that, say, Philadelphia did, where they were willing to take multiple cracks at being bad, and they ultimately wind up with Embiid.
Right.
And while that hasn't paid off yet, they have won 50 games 4 of the last 6 years. That's
there's just different philosophies. And I understand what you're saying. I guess how I would argue is it's really hard to find that generational superstar.
Of course.
And so you can take as many shots as you can. It's just they almost won the lottery. And Wembanyama, which would have maybe changed the course of everything, this year, and it's not like they tanked or had to be bad in order to get that. I mean, they almost did it. They didn't pull it off. But how different would have things been, if Wembanyama was coming here? All right, I'm
right,
running.
Well, I'll just be quick with this because I know you're running up against the break. So, would you rather be lucky or good? You'd rather be lucky, but as a plan, you can't plan to be lucky.
Right.
And so that's what Philadelphia with the process did, was we know we have to get lucky, so let's give ourselves as many lottery tickets as possible. We wanted to, I'll use this phrase again, relentlessly pursue getting that superstar. And they did, and they wound up getting it, even though they missed a ton. They missed on Michael Carter-Williams. They missed on Nerlens Noel. They missed on Markelle Fultz. But they hit on Joel Embiid. And so they give themselves that chance. And that's what I think the Wizards need to do moving forward. And
that's
why,
fair.
If they had started that process 2 years ago, they would have had a lot more lottery tickets because Bradley Beal was not going to be that guy.
And everyone agrees with you, and nobody agrees with me.
That's not the first time you put yourself in that scenario, Chris.
Listen, I know.
Love you, mean it, but
Stanek,
this is familiar territory.
Brendan Dar, all of you analytic people are killing me on Twitter because you don't understand how I would have said, you know what? Listen, Bradley Beal's come back-to-back 30-plus, made the playoffs. Let's build around him. And not everybody has a generational superstar. There's got to be more ways to win a championship.
That's ultimately the point.
I know.
He's a very, very good basketball player.
I understand.
He's not a generational
But what
superstar.
I'm saying is not everybody has one, so there's got to be a different way to skin the cat, basically.
But there's not.
And you're telling me there's not, and I would argue that there might be. Not that there is, but there might be.
What's your evidence for that?
I'm probably wrong.
What's your evidence for that?
Well, the Miami Heat.
Who lost?
Who lost?
Right.
Listen, I'm not telling. Look, I'm not accusing anybody. I'm telling you it doesn't make sense to me. But you explained it in a different way. If you and Ben Standig think the same way, then I must be wrong. So,
I don't know what to do with that comment, Chris.
Thank you, Craig. We'll
You're
see you in
welcome.
a little bit.
See you
I
in a little
appreciate it. That's Craig Hoffman coming up at 4 o'clock, explaining how dumb I am when it comes to NBA trades.